All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Erica Van Eaton. You can find me at ericavaneaton.com. I'm an intuitive energy healer, light language activator, intuitive, a lot of different things. But people have been asking a little bit more about my story and how I came into being here, working with everyone in this different kind of way. And so my story really began with the birth of my oldest son, almost 13 years ago next week, and he was born with Down syndrome. I've always been super intuitive, but I wasn't on the spiritual path. I didn't understand energy for quite some time. But when he was born and my husband brought him over to me and I said his name for the first time, he turned his head and he looked directly at me in the eyes. And anyone who's ever had a child or have seen a newborn, you know that this is very rare, that their eyes have such clarity. So when he looked at me that first time, I just knew this child. And I could see that he knew me too. And that was when I realized he had Down syndrome for the first time. And at the time, I was working as a cardiac sonographer in a hospital. I'd have to do ultrasounds in the NICU, neonatal intensive care unit. And so I've scanned babies with Down syndrome before. And that was the first thing I always noticed about them, is that their eyes were just wide and open and they had such clarity in them that the other babies didn't have. And that's the first thing I recognized about my son, besides the fact that I said his name and he looked directly at me. So even though our first experiences together were me going through the grieving process for a little while, because he had Down syndrome and the life that I had perceived we were going to live together, in that moment looked very different, because I knew that he was going to need a little extra care, but I also could see and know his brilliance in a way that no one else could. I just knew this child. I knew what he needed. I knew what he wanted. And I knew that he could know that he knew me too, and that he could feel what I was feeling. He was extremely intuitive, and I just knew this. So I intuitively knew as well that I was infecting, my internal emotional state was affecting him. When I was having a really bad, hard day, it would affect him and I could see it. And so I began to dive into the world of energy. And I began with meditation first, just to gain some semblance of peace from the negative mind chatter, the self-criticism that I often carried within me. And what I noticed was the more that I became quiet, the more that I became still, the easier my household ran, the easier it was for him to express himself. And everything became a lot simpler. So then he started school, and I had this fear. I had this fear when he started school that his teacher wouldn't know his brilliance in the same way I knew it. And by the time, just to give some kind of idea of what was happening, by the time he was 3 years old, because I could see and know his brilliance so clearly, I knew how to teach and accelerate his learning. So by the time he was 3 years old, he could sight read close to 100 words. He knew colors, he knew shapes. He was counting and all these magnificent things. But when he started school, I had a fear that his teacher wouldn't understand and know his brilliance the same way that I understood and knew it, and that she would just see him as a diagnosis. And because that was the main energy I was radiating out, this one of fear, that's exactly the kind of teacher I drew into our lives. He gained a teacher that only saw him as a diagnosis, and he began to shut down. And that's when autism became pretty prevalent. We began to have extreme behavioral outbursts at school, something that had never happened at home. And we lost our communication. This intuitive knowing that we had for each other went downhill. And we pretty much lost everything. And it was pretty devastating. And so then I really began to dive into the world of energy to not necessarily fix him, because I knew that he wasn't the problem. It was those around us that were the problem. Because what I could see happening is that this beautiful, brilliant child, depending on what environment he was in, he would conform to that. And so I started working with the Autism Collective Consciousness as a collective, energetic, and they brought forth this new kind of healing modality that I've been using. Because my question was, how can we have an individualized experience here while still being in unity consciousness? Because I understood that's where my son and others like him lived, was in this unity consciousness where they could feel all, see all, hear all in a way that we're not able to or haven't been able to up to this point. Because his frequency, when I connected with him on a spirit to spirit level, or others like him on a spirit to spirit level, is so much higher than any of us can hold. And they hold this whole spectrum of light, whereas most of us just hold like a few different rays. They come down on the entire rainbow of light. So they hold all these different spectrums of energy, all these different frequencies, and they're holding that for humanity. But my question was, how can we allow for him and others like him to experience this earth plane in a way that's not detrimental to his own self-expression? So my role here has been to allow for others to help others express their true soul signature and filter that out without restriction, without limitation. Because as we begin to truly express our unique soul signature and filter that out, we are having our individualized experience here on earth, but that also allows us to still live in unity consciousness because we're affecting everyone and everything around us in a beneficial way by radiating out these unique key codes that only we have. But our key codes affect everyone else's key codes and unlock aspects of others around us. We are all designed to work together. We are all pieces of a puzzle. So you're a piece of a puzzle. I'm a piece of the puzzle. If one of these pieces are missing, it's not a complete puzzle, right? So the divine created all of us to hold these unique key codes within our soul signature, within our heart space. But those have been very restricted. How much we can radiate those out are very restricted by the different kind of traumas, by the different kinds of stories that have been told to us about who we are or who we're not. So what I learned from the Autism Collective Consciousness was how to begin to heal, not just myself, but others in a way that is much more expansive and much more uplifting and bringing much more unity and first into our own human container. So with my son, the first thing that the Pleiadian Council of Light came in and had me do with him was actually give his ego an identity and a job for him. Because what those with autism don't do is they don't identify, coming in here, they don't identify with any one thing. So their ego plays a back role here. But because of that, they can get consumed by the energy around them. So I had to learn and retrain my own ego and come into the understanding that our egos are extremely beneficial. They've just never been trained properly how to assist us in a way that's uplifting and allowing the spirit to be expansive. So what I did for him was I showed his ego. I brought his ego into the round table, and we'll do that here in a minute. I brought his ego into a round table in his heart space, and I introduced it to his spirit. And I told the ego, this is the truth of your human container, are these unique codes for him. And your job, ego, is to expand out around his energy field and begin to filter off information without judgment. We're just looking at whatever information, whatever programs, whatever frequencies are coming into his field as information. And these frequencies, they're either going to bring harmony, joy, peace, and upliftment to his internal unique soul signature frequencies, or they're going to cause interruption. And so the ego's new job is to begin to filter out those frequencies that are causing interruption or disharmony. So we just began to expand his ego out, and it began to act as a filter for him. And when that happened, it was like the most beautiful thing. I could take him into a restaurant. He could go to school, and he wouldn't be so affected by everyone around him. He began to have his own identity and know the truth of who he is, and his self-expression completely expanded. And so even if I was having a bad day, he wasn't so affected, right? Because he had this filtration system in place helping him. So then I had to turn around and look at myself, right? That's ultimately what they came here to show us to do. I had to turn around and look at myself. And first I had to teach my own ego how to just filter from a place of neutrality instead of fear. And so I introduced my ego because these human aspects of self, we came down here to experience them, but we have never talked to them in a way that aligns them and brings divine union with our spirit. Usually in spirituality, we're taught to quiet the ego, shove it in a closet, shut the door, disidentify with the ego. But instead, we can begin to teach the ego how to operate differently in a way that brings upliftment and expansion of expression of self. So I began to work with my ego and making it malleable. I brought it into the round table. I introduced it to my spirit. And at first I apologized. I said, I am so sorry that I didn't listen to you, that I tried to dismiss you and quiet you and shove you behind a door. And just allowed my ego to be completely seen and completely heard. So first I did that. And then we began, with the help of my guides, to expand this ego out around my biofield, my energy field, clear out around the etheric rim. And I said, now it is your job. I'm giving you permission to begin to filter out information that's limiting my own self-expression when it comes in, that's causing disruption. Not just to my spirit, but causing disruption to my body consciousness. Our body has its own consciousness. That's causing disruption to my mind. My mind has its own consciousness. It's a beautiful thing. So these frequencies that are coming in, we don't judge them. And so we teach the ego not to judge them. We teach them just to look at them as information and redirect. So if it's something that is disharmonic in nature, if the vibrational frequency of that isn't a close vibrational match to those unique soul codes that I hold within me, then it's not for me. And that's okay. And we're not going to judge it. It's just someone else is out of alignment. Someone else hasn't come into divine union themselves, but we've been there. So we don't judge that. We just love that. And so first we did it from a place of neutrality. And then I was able to move my ego into a place of complete compassion. And now my ego has moved even further into becoming a healer. My ego can talk to other people's egos when we're in session and show it how it has become malleable. It continually looks back at my unique soul codes, because the more I grow and shift and change, more of those codes light up, right? Our DNA. So if, like they found in cancer patients, If we have a lot of negative thought forms, if we're in traumatic experiences, which we've all had, or, places that aren't very loving, what happens is our DNA actually shrinks and shrivels up and coils really tightly to protect itself. It's like self-preservation. So when that happens, our codes that are in that DNA strand shut down to preserve itself. So what they're finding through, different forms of cancer treatment and things, they're starting to work with sound and with light and to begin to uncoil and relax those DNA strands and lengthen them back out. And then what they're noticing is codes begin to turn back on. So when I do light language, or when you're just doing energy healing in general, or meditation in general, and bringing in different rays of light, what you're doing is unraveling and opening up your DNA to its fullest expression, turning on codes of light so that you begin expressing even more of your truth out from you. It radiates at you like radio waves. And when you have your human aspects on board, when you have your mind and your ego and your body consciousness all on board to help, instead of them restricting how much you can express yourself out of fear of self-preservation, it understands its job now has flipped. Its job is to only allow you to express the truth of who you are more fully. So before, our ego, no one guided it, no one directed it. It didn't have a rule book to follow. It was just looking at how other people's egos were operating around it. So it operated out of fear to keep this human container alive. And then we got mad at it and we dismissed it and we tried to shove it in a corner. So now we're flipping this whole role and we get to divinely love our ego, our personality, and we get to teach it how to work with us to allow for the greatest expansion of self. So if everyone would just like to close their eyes with me, take a deep breath in. Imagine there's a round table in your heart space. And it can look however you want it to look, but there's 4 chairs sitting at the table. We're going to call your mind consciousness to come sit down at the table. And it's going to come take a seat. And there's nothing it has to do. There's nothing it has to figure out. It gets to just be there and be seen. I'm going to ask for our egos, our personalities to come sit down at the table. And it's okay if some of yours, a lot of yours are kind of standing back, not wanting to take a seat at the table, and that's okay. We see you. It's okay. And we're going to ask for our body consciousness to come take a seat at the table. And then we ask for our spirit to come take a seat at the table. So today we're just talking about the ego. So we're just going to talk to the ego directly. I'm going to talk to the ego directly. Ego, how you came into form is when the fetus was developing in the mother, frequencies were coming into the baby's body from the mother, from the father, from the environment. And because the body consciousness didn't know exactly what to do with these frequencies, it sent signals to the brain that was developing. And these signals carried the same frequency as the frequency that was coming in from the external environment. Now, when similar frequencies came in often enough, it started creating neural pathways in the mind. And when neural pathways formed, it became a subconscious belief. for that baby. And you, ego, you were developing and you were trying to figure out how to keep this human alive, what you needed to do. So you began to look at these subconscious belief systems and took those on to be true for this whole human. And ego, you didn't know the mind had a voice. You didn't know the body had a voice. And the spirit didn't know that any of you had a voice either. So no one was in communication with the other. So ego personality, you began to grow up with this human, looking at the humans around them, seeing how they were all filtering information from a fear-based standpoint. You looked at the subconscious beliefs and you thought those were true for this human. But do you see how none of that was ever true for this human? All those frequencies came from external sources. The only thing that's true for anyone sitting at this round table is look across the table at the spirit and allow for the spirit to bring up the unique soul codes for you, for your human, that only you contain. Those vibrational codes that only you contain are the only things that have ever been true for your human. So now, ego, you begin to realize and see that all those other frequencies that the mind is running, that the body's cellular memory is running, that those are just distortions and false truths that are not true for you. So we get to let those go. And we'll do that slowly over time. And so now, ego, it's your job to begin to only filter out information from a place of neutrality that is going to cause disruption, disharm, or interference to the soul's expression of these unique frequencies. And you can talk to the spirit, and you can talk to the mind, and you can talk to the body consciousness to see what they need as well. So take a big breath in. We're going to thank all these human aspects of us for being here, for listening. And then we're going to allow them to leave the table and relax, to think about what was said here today. And I will leave you at this. Thank you for watching, and I will talk to you again soon.